Welcome to Summoner's Rift. Seconds until minions spawn.
Stick to your strategy, and then you're going to see the victory screen more often, and you're not going to have to experience as many like brutal losses, right? So yeah, that's what I would say to that.
Awesome. All right. Yeah. So, lastly, while we're talking about distractions,
Minions
I
have
feel like a lot of
spawned.
players are overly obsessed and angry with stuff like balance matches and other game systems. Like you hear them talk about how some champions are just OP, or that the matchmaking sucks, or that they're stuck in losers queue, stuff like that. Um, how do you deal with someone who's stuck in that mentality, like as if the game is against them?
What I would say is the game doesn't care about you that much. You know, the matchmaking system or what have you is working about as perfect as it can to give you about as close to a 50% win rate versus people close to your skill level as possible. I do think that players get way too distracted by that, like, by those systems and by the nerfs and the buffs and the this and the that. Players can't get out of their own way. Like, if you want this game to work for you and you want to experience the wins more, I would not focus on that at all. I would instead just focus on other things that you can control. Like, whatever Riot's gonna do, they're gonna do. What you need to ask yourself is, are they balancing the game to placate you? Or are they balancing the game because you're the type of person that's going to focus up and practice? Because Riot loves making champions hot for a while just to make players come back. But like, if you're the type of person that's just trying to go through, 10 champions every time you play League of Legends, like, you're never gonna be happy because you're never gonna actually get good at the game.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I feel like there's so much more interesting stuff to League. There's so many interesting topics to dive into that stuff like matchmaking and balance is almost one of the least interesting ones.
Yeah, I think that's reserved more for, and at the expense of sounding a little douchey, I think that's more reserved for people that are playing at a really high level, because I think there's basically three. I break it down into three different tiers of as just by doing the coaching. There's the introductory level where you have the players that are just starting out and they're trying to get to gold 4. They're trying to get to gold 4 because they'd like to get a skin. And then I call from gold 4 to, like, diamond 4. I call that beating the game tier. And the reason I say that is once you get to Diamond 4, you've essentially beat League of Legends. You don't really need to go further. I've held this opinion now for years. I don't think I'm going to change it. But I'm just saying that most players, they just, they get to Diamond 4 and then just stay there and just like play and play and play. And they don't try to do anything with the game. And that's why you get the meme of like, oh, the D4 hard stock, they're so terrible to play with, blah, blah, blah. Well, that's generally the reason, is because at that point, they're just addicted to the game and they're just playing it to play it. And they don't really care about the rank or the win or the losses. And that's why I say the next tier is, if you beat the game at Diamond 4, you're good. Maybe try a different champion and climb again with a different account or something. Keep the game fun for yourself. If you want to go further, though, I caution you, because I think that if you go beyond Diamond 4, you really should start asking yourself, why are you playing the game? And I would say that this game is a very dangerously addicting game. And I don't think enough content creators speak out about this. And even as a coach, I'm somebody that really prides himself on like my physical fitness, my health, all those things. I always warn people, if you're going to go beyond Diamond 4, I would strongly recommend you think about what you are going to do with all that time that you're investing into this game. Because what I'm trying to say is, don't turn this game into an addiction. Turn it into something positive for yourself. So even if the goal is to like, hey, I want to be, I want to get to masters because I want to show my friends I can do it, or maybe I want to make a guide, or maybe I want to try to join a team, or maybe I want to do this. Set a real goal and go after it. Do not just play to play beyond that point, because you're already there. And the reason I brought all that up, and I'm going to tie it all back in, those talks about balance changes and ranked wines and all of those things, that is more reserved for people in high diamond and beyond, because those players have been playing for a long time, and they are the ones that those changes generally impact. But a lot of low elo players like to tack on their experiences and be like, I know what this is like. And I don't want to be mean, but I just don't think it applies in those cases.
Yeah, I'm I'm glad we agree on this. All right. So I also have some questions for you about educational content in general. What kind of content would you say someone should seek out if they're really eager to learn? And on the flip side, what do you think people should avoid?
I don't want to bash anybody's businesses, so I will just say, just find somebody that you trust that will give you the truth. Like, there's so much content out right now that's it's put out there, and it seems so disconnected from the human side of just being like, it's just treating you like a person. I would much rather somebody just tell it to me straight than give me some sort of weird word salad, theory craft nonsense that's not actionable. I want actionable. And I think players really do focus too much on the weird stuff that they don't really need to bother with. I think the stuff that I would avoid is the, improve with this one trick. these tricks will blow your mind. This build is OP. That stuff is just so, I think people are always going to gravitate to these get LP quick schemes. And that's not really what I'm about. And, that's not what my coaching's about. But even the stuff that I watch, like for the first time that I ever made Challenger, I'm going to be real with you. I sat and watched Dopa replays. I think I probably watched not even his stream. I just loaded his replays up. I got a VPN and I got a 3 account. I bought it. And I literally just went and would study his replays. And I mean study them. I probably studied. That was the first time I made Challenger. It was with Twisted Fate, Cassidy. He was playing Twisted Fate and Cassidy in pretty much every game. And I would just sit there and just watch game after game. So another thing you can always do is just watch somebody who plays the champion you like and just study it. But if that's too boring for you, which I get, yeah, just find somebody that seems to care. not a big company or something, just somebody that seems to care.
Yeah, I like that. So after so many years of playing League and doing all the coaching and making all the content, do you ever worry about just burning out on the game entirely? And especially when the game starts to become your job, how do you prevent yourself from burning out?
So I do a lot to combat burnout. So I'm in a privileged position now, but I wasn't always. I didn't take very good care of my health. As the business has done better for me, I've made a very focused effort, and due to a lot of mentorship from people that have been in good positions before me and friends in my networks and everything, they reminded me like, hey man, like, you got to take care of your health. You've got to think about this at a long term. What do you want to get out of the game? What do you want to get out of this? And for me, it's always been, I will work in physical activity 6 times a week. There's plenty of thirsty pictures of me on Twitter, where you can you can see my physique now. I put a lot of time into my fitness. I put a lot of time into just taking breaks and doing things like going climbing and going for walks and things like that. And I don't really fear burning out, because if there's anybody that has experienced burnout by this point, it's me. And I know what it is. I know when I'm getting there. And I work really quickly to correct it. And now I just simply will schedule more free time. Like, I'll schedule more breaks, and I play, for example, like next week, I'm taking a break in the middle of the week to go play Halo with some people, Halo 1. So it's like, I do compartmentalize the game as a job now, which I don't know if that's a good thing or not. But it really does help for me, because I go, okay, this is work time. I have my play time sprinkled in everywhere, but it's really hard for me to reach the burnout stage, I guess, now, because I'm at a place that I never thought I would be at. I've just transcended all of my wildest dreams in regards to being a I mean, I would have been happy years ago just making ends meet, and I'm sure there's plenty of your listeners out there that know what that's like, where it's just like, "Oh, I'm just happy to have this job at all." Like, I've been there, and then things just kinda kept working out and getting better and better for me, and now I'm where I'm at, and I'm just like, "Dude, you had it so much worse, so, like, anything that's happening now is just, it's like bonus levels in Mario or something." You know, I'm just here like, oh, I have a coaching side. I didn't know I was going to do that. Oh, we got a business thing. Ah, I didn't know how to make a business. I didn't know I was going to be a business owner. That's cool. So it just keeps kind of like falling into place. And I guess that enables me to kind of, when you haven't had a lot, it makes having it a lot easier. I didn't grow up with much. Right, I was in Afghanistan for a year, like I said before. I didn't want to get too patriotic or anything. I'm not like super patriotic. I'm just saying, like, I've been in the situations where I didn't have a lot of money, or you know, life wasn't guaranteed the next day. So when you're in the position of like, well, you're playing a video game or you're yelling at people about a video game, dude, how stupid. You know, it makes it easier to avoid it. Burnout, I mean.
uh, I think it's amazing. It's yeah, I love it. I think it's a good approach to have. Awesome. All right, I think it's also a really great segue into the last question I wanted to ask you. So people come to you for your insight and your advice on the game. So what I wanted to ask you is, what is the best advice that you've ever gotten?
So one day I got a client and he basically just wanted to talk, which is kind of weird. So he booked the coaching and this happens actually. This is not the first time, just to be clear. This isn't like that weird. I've had multiple times now. I had one guy who was just like, you know, I've been in your shoes. And I was like, well, what do you mean? It was like, well, I can see how busy you are. Like, I see your schedule and I see how much you're working and you're working and you're grinding and you're grinding and you're grinding. And I was like, yeah. And he's like, well, just so you know, if I were you 10 years ago, I would tell myself, don't be afraid to just stop for a bit. He's like, I know it sounds cliche, the position that you're in, but just understand that every time I took a break, I came back and I was way more productive than when I didn't. And I think about that, and obviously that ties into the business stuff, but that also just ties into League as well. People say it all the time. I think in gaming culture now, it's become, and that's why I was really clear throughout this podcast today and making multiple points about this. I do not want this game to be an addiction for anybody. I do think that there's so many ways for you to get addicted to the purchasing the skins and the mindlessly spamming games and the toxicity and the rage. Like, I've been that guy who's just grinded. I pray none of your listeners ever experience what it's like to fail a challenger promo and then go on to lose 10 games in a row because they just didn't want to go to sleep. I pray that you guys just remember, don't be afraid to take a break, because wherever you're at, if you just step away for a little bit, you're going to be way more productive than if you tried to just like nose to the grindstone and just pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed through all the time. There's so many times where just getting away, I mean, I know that I took a week break and then I came back and I made the coaching website and all this stuff. And it hit me. I was like, that guy's right. Like, I am working a little too hard. And it does seem relevant in this day and age to realize that, you know, the overworking and the burnout and all that stuff is very real. And just hearing a guy who was the guy happened to own a multi-million-dollar company, was the guy who was talking to me. And he said that, and he's like, I would just tell my younger self, like, dude, you need to take a break. Like, it's going to be more productive. You're going to be more productive having taken a break than just trying to like push through it when you get into these walls and these funks. So I would just encourage your listeners to think about that and kind of consume it and realize that, like, you know, there's more to life than any one thing that you're currently obsessing over. Just remember to step away from time to time.
I think it's very good advice, very wise. All right. Cool. Yeah, thank you so much for being on this podcast. This has been really awesome. I've loved every moment of it. Where can people find out more about you?
So is this shill time? Is it shill time?
Oh, it's your
It's shill time. Okay, so the best way, I mean, at this point, you can pretty much just Google Nice, but there's YouTube. You could go to Nice. You could go to the League of Legends Challenger coaching channel. That's my second channel. There's also Chill Nice, which is a new channel that we built out. And then the reason that the Chill Nice thing existed was more of it was actually combating burnout. We were just talking about that, but I found myself just getting more and more mad during the day, and I use Chill Nice as a way to try new builds and champions, and to try to keep myself calm because I'm yelling at clients all the time. So that's something that you can check out. You can also check out fb.gg/Nice, which is my stream. You can go to nice.gg, which is my coaching site, and you can always book your coaching there. And lastly, if you're interested in the bootcamp stuff, you can go to discord.gg/bootcamp, and you can sign up for either the bootcamps or a coach pass, where there's basically, it's $15 a month, and you get access to some of the best coaches in the business, including my jungle coach Valaris, who built all those awesome jungle clears, that jungle clear spreadsheet that pros and aspiring pros use today. So yeah, just a ton of stuff to check out, guys. My life is basically, I'm immersed in this, so go check it out.
awesome. All right. All right, that's it for this episode. Don't forget, if you want to have a chance to win the giveaway, be sure to join the Challenger Insights Discord. The link for that will be in the show notes. Lastly, if you enjoyed this episode, please consider sending it to someone who you think would be interested in it. Thank you for listening.
I hate to break this to you, but if you're a new developer, it's likely that you're writing code that is suboptimal, subpar. There's a lot of things you're doing that makes your code very, let's call it, hard to read. It's a lot of messy code. So in this video, what I wanted to do with you guys is something a little different than my other videos and talk about 5 rules that you can apply today and instantly make your code a lot better. And I'm going to use examples as well. So I want you to walk away feeling like you have some tangible things that you can use in your tool belt. So without any further ado, let's get into it. The first rule that I'm going to recommend to you is to really think about having more descriptive names for your variables and your functions. It's very common for new developers when they are creating a variable or creating a function is just to sort of throw a name on it. It makes sense to them in the moment. But the problem is that most names are just random and they don't really think through them. And this really does matter. It really does make a big difference because later on, right? So say the next day when you go to revisit your code or the next week, or it's very common for maybe 3 months later, you're going to revisit your code. If you have random names for variables and functions, it's going to be a lot harder to parse through what the code is actually doing. So let's look at an example here to really see what I mean. So this right here is a digital clock app that one of my clients built early on when he was learning the code. And let's take a look at this actual code here as well. So one of the things that you'll notice, for example, is that there is a variable that's declared at the top called 24. And it's a boolean. Let me ask yourself, what is 24? And that's a really good question. I don't know. Just looking at this, there's no... What this 24 variable is it's holding a value that is telling us whether it is in military time, which is 24 in this case, or if it's standard time, so if it's 12 hours. So at the moment that this person created this variable, 24 made sense to them. But when someone else comes there, it may not make complete sense. So there's no surefire name for every single variable, but in this case, what I would recommend naming it to is something like is military time. A couple reasons why I named this is military time. First of all, if a variable is a Boolean, meaning there's only 2 options, a true or false, then it's really good to prepend the variable name with is, because it can either be or it cannot be, right? In this case, is military time, it's pretty clear that there probably is going to be a variable here that's going to hold a true or false, and then it's going to tell us whether we're currently in military time or in standard time. This is a really good example here. Also, there's a variable here called button press. Now, what you'll notice here is that what this variable is actually holding is it's actually holding a reference to a button in our HTML because we're getting that by its ID and we're storing that in this variable called button press. So we really don't want to name this button press because button press, it just sounds very ambiguous. I'm not quite sure what that means. You can even see there's a comment above there that still doesn't really describe what's going on in there. Instead, I would name this to what it is. So I would probably name this the, military time toggle button. Although a lot of you guys are going to say that's such a long name. Oh my gosh. I don't mind long names. I mean, you could obviously shorten this. You could just say military toggle button if that's a little bit better for you, if you like something shorter. But the point is you can really just name it for what it is, which is the military toggle button. So this is a good example of just 2 things right there. Now, beyond that, you also want to think carefully about function names. And this is where a lot of people go wrong. Function names are, first of all, they should be a verb because when you call a function, when you invoke a function, you are doing something. It is not a noun. It is not something that just, exists. So you want to make sure you name it a verb, but also describe what's going on inside of it. So let's look at one more example. You can see this function here, down below what we had referenced before, is called update. Now, just looking at it, what does update do? Well, I can look through this and I can kind of see that we're basically getting the time here, we're formatting the time, and then we're displaying the date on the page. So to me, this would really be not update, because update is a very general or generic name for a function. I would try to name it something more specific. The end result here is really that it's rendering the date on the page. So I would really just say render date. I think that's more descriptive. And wherever we're using this, I think we're using this all at the very bottom here. You can see there's a set interval that's updating this every 1 second. Now you can see that we're calling the render date function. So this is just another way to think about making a function name that's very specific to what's going on inside of it. So now I know whenever it's being called somewhere else, I know exactly what's happening. So as far as getting better at variable and function naming, I would say go back to your previous projects. So go back to maybe 1 or 2 that you've built and look at the variable and function names. Do they make sense? Do they really describe what's going on inside them? If the answer is no, then try to rename them to something better. I think that's the best exercise you can have. It often takes months and months of practice of this to really get a good sense of it. I would even look at other people's code. The second rule that I recommend you follow is to keep your functions short. And this is a mantra I repeat so many times to a lot of my clients because it's something that is not natural to think about, but you want to keep your functions very, very short. So a good rule of thumb here is about 15 lines of code. Now, it's a rule of thumb. It's not a hard and fast rule. So if you write more than that, it doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. And if you write less than that, it doesn't mean you're doing it wrong as well. But the key word here is that your functions should do one thing and do it well. Now, there's a lot of reasons for this, but one of the best reasons I found is that when you have many functions in your code and they all do one thing really well, it's easier to see what's going on because you have these well-named functions and they're just being called one at a time. Whereas if you have one function that does everything inside of there, it takes a lot longer for your brain to sort of read through and just go line by line and see everything that's going on. I find one of the best reasons to break out code into a function is just to give a function a name, a very descriptive name, and it encapsulates or abstracts away, meaning it makes all that code really simple to understand. So instead of having to go through 10 lines of code to understand what's going on, line by line by line, you just read the function name and boom, I got it. exactly what's happening. And you do that all over the place in your code, and it instantly becomes more readable. So let's look at an example real quick. Okay, so we're looking at that same clock app code. You can see we're looking at that render date function here that I changed the name of. If you look at this function here, it's breaking a bunch of rules. First of all, it's doing more than one thing. If you really look at it closely, we're getting the time, we're formatting the time here. Really, this is the date and the time. We're actually rendering the time on the page, even though this says format time. This is not a very well-named function. This should actually be render time. So it's not doing one thing and doing it well. It's doing a couple different things. So we want to keep this true here. We want to just make this render date. We can first of all remove this render time function and call it outside of the function. So that saves us a little bit of code. So if we go down to where it was being called before, you can see a render date is being called here. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to create a callback function inside of here. And we're going to call the render time function and the render date function, just like that. I'm going to get rid of the comment here. It's a little bit unnecessary. Now keep in mind that we had 3 arguments being passed into render time there, as you can see. So we have to create those local variables so we can pass them in. Now what's really cool is we can really shorten this up here by taking all of this outside of our function here. So you see seconds, minutes, hours, months, day, and year, and we can just do that in one place outside of the function. So we can take that here, we can place that right in here, and now we can pass all of that information as parameters for month, day, and year, something like that. So now if we go up to the very top here, where we're using that, we can just pass that here as month, day, year, something like that. You can also probably just take these if statements out here and actually format that as well. Actually, I think we need to do all this here. Format that there. You can see our render date function is now 3 lines of code because all it's doing is taking in the month, day, and year and just basically displaying that. That's pretty good. And we're going to take all of that formatting we were doing and place it right here. And I'm just going to code all. I messed up here. Let's go ahead and format that. That looks a bit better. So now our set interval function has a lot more going on to it. We could do a lot more to simplify it, but at least these little functions for rendering date and rendering time are now simplified. At least the render date is. The render time needs some work as well. But you can get the basic idea here that if you have a function, it does one thing, does it well, it should be a lot smaller than it was before. All right, now before we go on to the next rule, I just kindly ask if you've enjoyed the video so far, definitely go down below and smash the like button. Also hit the subscribe button as well. The third rule that I recommend is actually to not use abbreviations for variable names. So it can be very tempting if you want to shorten down your variable name, like month to MON and second to SEC. And that can make sense because, hey, that's really readable, right? The problem is that that is not a widely known abbreviation. And so while it makes sense in the moment that that's a good abbreviation for you, when you come back a week later, heck, even a day later or 3 months later, you may look at that and you'll just be like, I'm not really sure what this is. And then you have to go look and track down what that meaning of that variable is or what that variable is holding. Now this triggers a lot of software developers who are in the field. I know there's a lot of back and forth about this, and some people, you should definitely use them. But I say only use abbreviations for common things, like things that are widely recognized. Like you're using the word HTTP in your variable name, you don't have to type out hypertext transfer protocol. For example, it's widely recognized. But let's look at an example really quick just to give you an idea of what I mean. So again, going back to our clock app here, this one's pretty easy. If we go back to where we are using these variables here for the minutes, the seconds, the hours, the months, the days, you can see that sec, min, and month, or second, minute, and month are all abbreviated. And while, again, this makes sense here in a lot of ways, it makes sense when you're declaring it, later on when you're using it, if you don't have this context for what SEC is, this can be a little bit confusing. I'm not a big football fan or college sports fan, but SEC, is that the Southeastern Conference? Min, is that minimum, or is that minute? And mon, is that for hey mon, or is this for Monday? Like, you don't really know. And obviously this isn't an example that doesn't really show, like in a real world application, how confusing it could be, but just to give you a sense, like if you didn't have all this information here, so you just deleted that, and this is all you had, it may not make any sense. So that's why I don't recommend abbreviations. The fourth rule that I recommend is to use comments sparingly. And this may go against a lot of what you've heard. I know when I was a new developer, people told me comment everything because you'll remember much more and you'll be able to figure out code a lot easier. But when I got into the workforce, I actually found that most of my coworkers didn't write any comments at all. And I was so confused. I was like, I thought you were supposed to comment everything. I thought you'd get fired if you don't comment everything. But what they told me, my coworkers like pretty much educated on me, is that comments are actually more harm than good most times, at least the way I see many people use it. Because number one, sometimes they're just unnecessary and redundant. Because when you write a comment, you can easily just rename the function to describe what it's doing, so you don't need a comment, or you can rename the variable so that it describes what it's containing, so you don't have to write a comment. Even beyond that, it really is distracting because when you are writing code, one thing you want to have is a very high signal to noise ratio, right? When you read a book, when you read your favorite novel, there's very little noise on the page. There's just a bunch of words. They're broken down to paragraphs. It's very easy to go through. Imagine if the author instead had scratched things out and had red pen where they didn't want to have certain sentences. There'd be too much going on for you to really be able to concentrate fully on what you're doing. So that's one of the problems with comments, is they add that distraction in there that can actually pull you away from being able to read through your code. And the last thing to keep in mind about comments is there are a huge liability in your code. So say you add a description of a function above a function as a comment. Well, guess what? If anything changes inside that function, you have to remember to go up and change that comment as well, because that now needs to reflect the new changes. Well, does that always happen? I can tell you in the real world, most developers will forget to do that. So now this function that has a description above it, if you forget to update it, will now be describing the function in an incorrect manner. So you have to keep that in mind. So let's look quickly at that clock app and see some examples of comments and why they can be removed. So going back to the top of the code here, you can see, remember this military toggle button that we renamed? Well, look at how this was a liability, because we had said before that it was for button presses. And first of all, it wasn't even a very good name for a variable. We changed the name to military toggle button. Now there's really no reason for a comment, because the variable really describes it very well. So that comment can be removed. Now you can see we have a comment here called main function for our render date. Well, we don't really need a comment here anymore because we described what's going on. We're rendering the date on the page, so we can remove that there. Now you can see here, this was actually really well-intentioned function, or a comment here, because we're saying function to switch from 24 to 12-hour time. Well, either this name should describe what it's doing, or it's not good enough, we should change it, right? So what do you think? Switch 24? I don't know. I could probably think of a million names, and there's no perfect name, but here I would actually say toggle is military time, or you can even just say toggle military time, or you could say maybe toggle clock type, or whatever it is. I think that is much better, right? And now you can see this is much more descriptive of what's going on inside the function, so that's not needed as well. And then of course you can just sort of see here that format time function, same thing, you don't need it because it's describing what's going on inside of it. This one I love, by the way, this is the last one we'll cover here. Basically, this is an apology comment saying, you know, I wrote this, but I'm not really too sure about it. I do that all the time. I say that this is probably the most valid one I could think of, because I like to leave notes for myself to improve it later. But even then, this is still probably something that we can do without. So I would just recommend to stay away from comments here unless they're really, really important and really describe something that can't be described in your code. Now, the fifth rule I'm going to recommend for you is called YAGNI, or you ain't gonna need it. And this comes up a lot with new developers and actually seasoned developers as well. And it's more of something to keep in mind when you're building an application and when you're writing code as well. But what can often happen is as you're writing code, you start to think of all these other possibilities of the code that you're writing and they need in the future, right? So a really quick and easy example, say you're building a calculator and you write a function with numbers together, accepts two numbers as arguments and returns the output or the sum of them. Well, if you're a really clever developer, you may think, well, why stop at that? Maybe we need to add 3 numbers together. Or maybe at some point, somebody's going to need to add 4 or 5 or 6 numbers together. Maybe we should create functions for that. Now, the thing is, while this is really creative, and I'm glad you're thinking outside the box, you're spending a lot of time on something that really hypothetical. And it happens to a lot of developers. They spend way too much time thinking about hypotheticals and things they may need to do. So when it comes to YAGNI, you just want to make sure as you're developing your app that you're not working towards the hypothetical, that you have clear ideas about what you want for outcomes for your code or outcomes for your application, and just work around that. Later on, if users may or may not decide to, do this or that, it doesn't really matter. You just focus on what you know are the minimum, because what this is called is scope creep. When you start adding code for possibilities and different features that you want that weren't in the original plans, that's when a project that could take you 2 weeks may take you 2 months or 6 months or a year. I've seen it happen, and anyone who's been a software developer definitely knows what that's all about. So that's YAGNI. Just keep that in mind as well. All right, guys, those are my 5 rules for writing better code. If you enjoyed the video, please let me know in the comments below. Also, if you're interested in a free self-taught programmer study manual, I will leave a link in the description below of how you can download that. Other than that, thank you so much for watching. Peace out, everybody.
Your inhibitor is respawning soon. Your inhibitor is respawning has been slain.
What's at the edge of the universe, and what happens if we try to get there? You might be thinking, wait, how is there an edge to the universe if it's infinite? This gets talked about a lot, and people usually say one of the following. The universe defines all of space and time that exists. Well, that's one definition of universe, but is it even part of our universe if we can never interact with it? And what if our universe is very, very different beyond the edge? The universe is infinite because general relativity tells us that the universe is demonstrably flat, and therefore the galaxies go on forever. But how flat? Are you sure you measure the universe's curvature with infinite precision? And my favorite, we can never know and never test it, so it's not even a scientific question. Oh yeah? I'll science any question I please. This is space-time. Okay, sorry. Before we get carried away, let's talk about the edge or edges of the universe and what it might take to get there. In a previous episode, we talked about the size of what we call the observable universe. We even gave you a number, 93 billion light years in diameter, 46 billion in radius. Go ahead and watch it again. It'll be useful. While you're at it, we're also going to be talking about the CMB, so I wouldn't kill you to watch that episode also. Okay, let's start with that 46 billion light year number. We define that as the current radius of the known universe. It's the distance to that blob of the CMB, the most distant thing we can see in that direction. Now, it's not 46 billion light years to that actual blob. It is currently 46 billion light years to whatever galaxy or galaxy clusters that blob evolved into, racing away from us with the expanding universe as it did. We call this the particle horizon of the universe. It's the current instantaneous distance to the most distant part of the universe that could possibly have a causal connection to us. Anything inside the particle horizon is referred to as the known universe. Now, when I say the current instantaneous distance, I mean it's the distance that you would have to travel only if the universe froze in its expansion and you were traveling through static space. In cosmology, this sort of instantaneous distance is basically what we call the proper distance between 2 points. But nothing actually ever travels the proper distance. That's not how space-time works. The shortest path in space-time is defined by the geodesic, the path of light between 2 points. Even light takes time to make any journey, so we have to factor in the time interval, especially when space is changing. To travel to the particle horizon, we need to move through expanding space, and the closer we get to our destination, the more space will have expanded over the remaining distance. How far would you have to travel? Bad news, you'd have to travel infinitely far, even if you were in a spaceship that could travel at the speed of light. Just as black holes have event horizons, so too do universes. The event horizon of a black hole is that point beyond which we can never receive information because light from that point is redshifted into oblivion. It's a boundary to the observable universe. There's a region of this universe from which we can never receive any new signal. That is, any signal that's emitted today. This is because the distance that signal has to travel to get to us will be expanding faster than the speed of light before the signal reaches us. Same thing applies to our light speed spaceship. We can never get to anything beyond the cosmic event horizon because that space will be moving away from us faster than light before we reach it. Now here's where it gets weird. The event horizon of the universe is actually closer to us than the particle horizon. Given our best measurements of cosmological parameters, we think that the cosmic event horizon is around 16 billion light years away. This means that there are galaxies that we can see now that we could never reach or even communicate with. We're sort of seeing ghost images from outside the part of the universe that we could ever interact with. As our universe expands, more and more of it will cross the event horizon, and eventually almost all of it will be lost to it forever. Kind of sad, really. Of course, all bets are off if we can break the cosmic speed limit, so let's do just that. There's no doubt that Einstein was right in setting that limit for objects moving through space, but two regions of space can have superluminal relative speeds. That's actually the motivation behind the warp drive, which we might get to in a later episode if you're up for the challenge. But for now, let's just assume we have a nice Alcubierre-class warp ship, and we burn the mass energy of entire stars to chase the particle horizon. What do we find? Almost certainly, just more universe. Bummer. Remember, the particle horizon is just defined by the limit of our current view. Move to my left, and my observable universe moves with me. Wait a minute, and my particle horizon expands. And you'll see the Milky Way as a tightly bathed CMB blob on your new particle horizon, and presumably a pretty similar distribution of galaxies and clusters all around you. But what if we keep going? What's far beyond that edge? Well, that all depends on the geometry of the universe. On the largest scales, the geometry of space-time is very flat. It's lumpy on small scales due to stars and galaxies, but smooth on large, sort of like ripples on the ocean. Measurements of the distribution of galaxies and the CMB confirm this flatness with very high, but not infinite, precision. If space-time really is perfectly flat, then, with the most simplistic application of Einstein's equations, we get that the universe is infinite. Now, people claim this a lot. So, if it's true, what happens if you cross the particle horizon? The universe just goes on and 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 on, and infinity is its own amazing beast, and there are many types of infinity, including some that involve infinitely repeating versions of this bit of the universe. But is our universe really perfectly flat? Think about it this way. The surface of the Earth looks pretty flat to us because we really can't see the curvature locally. But get some perspective by taking a ride on the International Space Station, and it's clearly curved. What if the curvature of the universe is so small that we're just not seeing far enough or measuring precisely enough to detect it? It's very possible that the universe has curvature just inside the uncertainty range of the best measurements to date. If that curvature is positive, then it may be that the universe is really the surface of a hypersphere, the 3D surface of a 4D sphere. In that case, our warp ship would eventually travel all the way around this curved hypersphere and get back to where it started. Okay, so how far would it have to travel? Based on a recent estimate of the minimum radius of curvature of the universe, you'd need to travel an absolute minimum of 18 times the distance to the particle horizon to get back to where you started, assuming expansion froze for the whole journey. We also have to keep in mind that these geometries assume that we can just extrapolate Einstein's equations in the most simplistic way. In addition, although general relativity is pretty cool, it's not a theory of everything. Non-crazy ideas for the origin of particle inflation suggest that our universe may just be a slowly expanding bubble in an exponentially, infinitely inflating multiverse. Now, bubble universes may be finite in size, regardless of internal geometry, and so they may have a true edge. But what's on the other side? Are the laws of physics, or even the number of dimensions, the same? Tell us what you think in the comments. We'll cross that edge into the multiverse in another episode of Space Time. Squishina and others ask whether it's contradictory or circular to use Einstein's theory of general relativity to prove itself. Well, the only way to test a theory is to use it. However, you're right in thinking that just one prediction is not enough. A model has to make multiple independent and accurate predictions to be accepted as a theory. And there are few theories with as many independent and accurate predictions as general relativity. For example, the predictions GR makes for planetary orbits can give us a mass for the Sun. And that mass predicts the deflection angle for light passing the Sun perfectly, that is, its gravitational lensing effect. Same with galaxy clusters. The galaxy orbits give us a mass for the dark matter in the clusters, and the lensing gives us a mass consistent with this. Shadowmax889 asks why stars and planets aren't filled with dark matter. Now this is a great point. Dark matter is cold and clumpy, which means it can bunch together to form galaxies, but it doesn't interact with itself in any other way besides gravitationally. This means there's a limit to its clumpiness. To collapse completely into a star-sized object, it would have to lose a lot more energy. This is really hard unless you can interact electromagnetically. By comparison, the cold hydrogen gas that fills our galaxy clumps together in giant clouds, but then these clouds radiate light in different ways, allowing the gas to cool even more and collapse into stars. Dark matter doesn't do that, so it stays sort of puffed up. Mr. Lewis asks if we can please stop throwing monkeys into black holes. Don't worry, no monkeys were harmed in the making of space-time in any events that could be consistently assigned to our clocks at PBS. Isvazone informs us that upon winning a Nobel Prize for discovering dark matter particles, he or she would spend all of the prize money on Phoenix bases. And yeah, I guess that's cool, but I only play 1.6.
An ally has been slain.
cannot hold.